Hello everyone, welcome back to another tabletop baseball video coming to you from a new studio, otherwise known as my wife's desk. Today I'm going to take a look at another vintage baseball game called Pennant Drive. And as we'll talk, this game came out in 1980. It had the obligatory marketing catchwords, the most exciting baseball game ever. It was developed by a person named Clott, C-L-O-T-T. And without further ado, I'm going to kind of jump into this. So, I know all of you don't make it through the entirety of my videos. And so I've got this kind of what they call TLDR, or too long didn't read, but it's really an executive summary of sorts of what I'm going to talk about today regarding this game. So the first thing, I've got it labeled as disclaimer or acknowledgement. I try to be fairly objective and tactful when I'm talking about these vintage games. I'm going to be a little more blunt in a couple instances here today, so I just wanted to make fair warning. But in the same breath, I want to acknowledge that I really have a lot of respect for these folks who were developing games back in the 70s and 80s. In some respects, it's kind of was a golden age of baseball game development. And I think we're probably in another one now with all the cool games that are being developed nowadays. So I'll make some comments to that effect as we go on. As I said, the first edition of this game came out in 1980. It featured the 1979 season. The developer packaged his product under the name of the AccuStat Game Company. I think there was also an AccuStat football game, which may actually have been a forerunner to one of the modern electronic games, but you'd have to do more research to prove that. I believe this game was produced for 3 years. We'll talk about that a little bit. Very key to the discussion today, the engine was based on essentially 2d6 dice, or they provided random number charts. We'll talk about those random number charts here in a minute, and then we'll talk about them at the very end as well. I think this game actually had a pretty simple and clever design in some respects in terms of the engine, but because it was based on 2d6 dice with 36 chances, it has the same issues with lack of precision that a lot of other games do that have the same underlying, I guess, mathematical underpinnings. Specifically, I think there's something called a pitcher PR rating, which is essentially a batting average adjustment. And I really don't think those were accurate, I guess, for lack of a better term. On the other hand, the game had a wide variety of features, and I think some of them are actually unique. I don't know if I've seen some of them before. I'll talk about that. Another observation is that there's a limited number of player cards that were issued. So it's ripe for reverse engineering, but we'll talk more about that too. The third edition, which I believe was the last edition in 1982 with the 1981 cards, appears to have addressed some of the issues that I'm going to point out, and they also added a few new features along the way. So with that, I'm going to just briefly show you a few of the game components. So this came with 11 pages of typewritten instructions in order how to play the game. And so just the fact that it was typewritten tells you that this is probably something that a guy did in his garage or in his basement or whatever. It doesn't make it any more or less of a attractive feature, and in some respects the nostalgia person in me actually thinks this is pretty cool. And it actually reminds me of my own sim, where I still have the typewritten instructions that my wife lovingly typed for me. So moving on, we might as well talk about it here. I mentioned earlier the instructions talk about how you can either use this random number chart, which is two-sided, and in total it has 1,300 different random numbers. They do, of course, say that you could just roll two dice, preferably one of having two different colors, just like apba, for example, and read them in order, and then you would get the random numbers. Otherwise, you could pick some random starting point on this chart, just read down the column, and these would be your random numbers for the game. We are going to talk about this chart at the end. So without further ado, we'll move on just to show you a few other things. We're going to talk in detail about the player cards, but this is an example of the sheet for the Pittsburgh Pirates, and I'm almost certain of the fact that they only had 12 position players and 8 pitchers on these rosters, which I guess is not unlike what Stratomatic did before they started producing the extra players. But one could argue it's not sufficiently large roster, especially relative to today's standards. The other thing is this is all one 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and so I've heard at least one person comment about how small these cards are. Now, on the other hand, there's not a lot of information on these cards, but I think probably someone would probably prefer bigger cards nowadays. One other little game component is these SP cards, and it looks like one individual card is typed both right side up and upside down. And the best way I can describe these cards, based on my limited understanding of the game, is you can think of them as the split cards in Stratomatic, or just a D20 die, because there's 20 of them, and then you would turn it over and there's 20 more. And I think these are used for things like stolen bases, I believe, and they're also used in the defensive checks, and you can see that there's a reference to a position in here, which would indicate which player is under consideration for an error. So there you go. This is not intended to be a demo by any means, so it's more about the analysis of the game. I think the next best thing to do is to look at the player cards. So here we have a batter card, and it's pretty obvious what they annotated here, some of the obvious pieces of information. But what I've done here is annotated some things about the ratings. So we'll talk about the flow of the game, but in batter up, the pitcher's walk and strikeout ratings are some of the first things that come into play. And on the batter card, there are some adjustments to those ratings potentially. So, for example, Rod Carew, I believe, must have drawn more than the average number of walks. So this P1 means you +1 the pitcher's walk rating. If there's an asterisk, you don't do anything. And then another key to this game, which we'll talk about at length, is this batting average rating, which ranged from A to M. Now, in reality, the practical range with this batting average rating, I'm calling it a batting average rating. It's technically not, but anyways, it typically fell kind of in the FGHI range, and we'll see all that. The other thing that's on the batter card is some ratings for their propensity to get extra base hits, 1 being the lowest, and I don't know what's the highest, 10 maybe, I don't know. We'll see how that works as well. There was a base stealing feature to the game, which had both a jump rating and a base stealing rating as you go. And then there was a separate running rating. There were only 3, fast, average, or slow. And then there was a defense rating as well, and there were only 3 of those. So that's Rod Carew. Now, if we look at the pitcher card, and these are from the instructions actually, you have Nolan Ryan, and so here you have strikeout rating. Higher is better for strikeout ratings for the pitcher. So he had a pretty high rating there. I think again it's a 1 to 10 scale for strikeouts, maybe 1 to 12. We'll see. We may see that here in a minute. Yeah, it's actually 1 to 11. And then there's a walk rating, which ranges from 1 to 7. And so he was probably above average in the walks he gave up. In this case, walks, the higher number is worse. And then I call this a batting average adjustment. Let me see. This will come into play actually in a minute. So in this case, lower is worse, higher is better. So not too bad. They do have a fatigue system in this game. They call it a tiring factor. And what happens when the pitcher gets tired is this PR rating that you see right up above drops to like a 1, and it drops instantly. And it's pretty painful when it does. Honestly, I think I would homebrew that rule because it's too punitive. I mean, Nolan Ryan, if he's moving along, shouldn't be punished just because, he's pitched 7 innings. The other thing you can see here is that there are separate wild pitch, hit batsman, and balk ratings for pitchers. And they're very much correlated to, to their actual experience, to being high, in this case, or worse, and 1 and 0 being good or better. There's a home run rating, which I think is a very important aspect of baseball sims. And in this case, what it does is it will enable the pitcher to influence positively or negatively the extent to which home runs occur off the batter's card, if you will. And then there's the pitcher has his own defense rating. So those are the cards. I don't know which to do first, but the key to the game here is what they call this master result chart. And so down the left-hand side are the 36 dice rolls, 1-1 up through 6-6. And here you have kind of strikeout ratings and walk ratings in this column called step 1. And then over here in step 2 is where you'll check for a hit and or it may just turn into an automatic out. And the reason why this is scaled the way it is to reflect the different batter ratings, which are labeled across the top, A through M. So if you're an M batter, your hits per plate appearance, you only have 6 possibilities, which are these yellow boxes. In other words, 1-1 through 1-6 on the dice. And there's entirely a possibility that, depending on the pitcher's rating, he may take away 1 or more of these hits. So it's entirely possible an M-rated batter would only have approximately a 1 in 36 chance of getting a hit. That would probably be reserved for a guy like Luke Walker on the Pittsburgh Pirates, who just really hardly could ever get a hit. Anyway, what I've done here is I have done a flow chart. You can pause this if you want, but basically step 1 is to determine if there's going to be a walk or a strikeout, or possibly an error or a rare play, including a wild pitch. So you can see on the right there, if you roll a 3-4, If there's men on base, it's going to be a wild pitch, or at least possibly a wild pitch, depending on the pitcher's wild pitch rating. 3-5 is how you get to the rare play chart, which is mostly hits batsmen, I think. And then 3-6 is where you go into the defensive check and a possible error. So if it's not a walk or a strikeout or one of these rare plays or whatever, then it's a possible hit. And from the next step you do, as I indicated here briefly, is using the same random number that you did on the first check. If the walk or strikeout down here don't apply, if it's not one of these rolls, and it's not one of these unusual rolls, but if it's anywhere from 1-1 to 3-3, it's possible that there's going to be a hit if the intersection of the dice roll and the batter rating is a yellow box. Now, once it's a yellow box, then you also have to check the pitcher's PR rating to see if the pitcher takes away that hit. So this entire engine approach is remarkably close to a game that I reviewed recently called Big League Manager. And at the end, I'll provide a link to a video I did on that. But it's kind of ironic in a sense that it uses a similar concept, but it's displayed in an entirely different way. Now, if it's not a hit, then these things tell you the type of out that it is here. But if it is indicated a hit, then you go over to this column, you do roll again, and then you check the batter card to see if one of the extra base hits apply. If it's not an extra base hit, then it's a single. So going back to this flow chart, that's kind of what this describes. So where my thumb is, it's a possible hit. You determine if it is a hit, then you got to roll again, see what kind of hit it is. It could be a single, double, triple, or home run. And then if it's not a hit, the master result chart will indicate the type of out. So pretty basic flow. Maybe one extra dice roll if it's a hit, but I think, as the instructions say, most of your results are going to be resolved in some form or another in this one-page master result chart. And then you can see at the bottom there's different types of ground balls and fly balls and infield in, infield back, and things like that. The other thing I'll say, and I haven't studied this too much, but they do have a feature where you can either do individualized fielding and defense, or kind of similar to apba, you can aggregate the team defensive numbers, and then that can influence the type of results that happen on flyouts or ground outs of different types here. So yeah, so that's the game flow. So let's go back again to another card example, which came from the instructions again. Just want to point out a few things. Willie Stargell in 1979, World Series MVP. He struck out a lot, and so that's why you see his strikeout rating up here is a +3. In other words, he'll make the pitcher 3 notches better on his strikeout rating. You can see, Willie Stargell had 32 home runs in 424 at-bats. So you can see his home run rating is pretty high, 10 actually, in 1979. He never stole, and he was probably a slow runner by that time, so that's indicative of these ratings here. one of his World Series opponents, Scott McGregor, for the Orioles. You can see his walk rating is good. It's the lowest possible, actually. It's a 1 for 1979. And he does okay on his batsman and balk and wild pitch ratings as well. Looks like he doesn't make any adjustment to the batter home runs as well. So that's what the cards look like. Keep this in mind because I'm going to get to what the most important part of the video here is, which is I actually analyzed that master result chart, particularly the hit section, and essentially what should happen on this chart for hits or even strikeouts and walks is we're talking about what is the percentage likelihood of a hit or a walk or strikeout per plate appearance. And I use something called adjusted plate appearances, but for today it doesn't matter what that means. But anyways, so Willie Stargell, if you remember, was a G-rated batter. And I did the calculation, and he got a hit 25% of every plate appearance, according to my calculations. Yeah, that should be right. And I'm thinking of plate appearances because, plate appearances including walks. So this is going to be lower than his batting average. So he's column G, and 25% is, I think, exactly on this row here, row 4. The major league average was 24.1, so he was slightly above average in terms of getting a hit, and he had a 281 batting average, so that makes sense. McGregor, I see down here, his hits as a percent of adjusted batter faced or plate appearances was 23.7, so slightly better than average. So the question you might have is what is the average batter and what's the average pitcher? And the average batter is probably going to be to the right here, like an H or an I batter, and I'm guessing the average pitcher is maybe a 4 or 5. I don't know. It's hard to say. But the real issue here is if you look at McGregor's card again, his PR rating was a 7. And what that means is on this chart, or the other chart with the yellow boxes, this chart, you would read down column G, and then you would roll a dice. And if there was, let's say you rolled a 2-3, well, there's a 5 in that box. That 5 is within the range of 1 to 7 on McGregor's card, so instead of a hit, it would be an out. Well, the math would tell you, if you study the chart that I just showed you, that if McGregor as a 7 is facing Stargell as a G, the number of hit chances is such that it's only going to produce a hit 16.9% of the time. And I think this is where the real flaw in the game design is, where, Stargell's a little bit above average, so he's in the G, and McGregor's a little bit better than average for pitchers, so Stargell probably shouldn't have a 25.4 hit percent. Maybe it should be a little lower. And so arguably, I think McGregor's PR rating probably should have been a 5, and it would get you more in this percentage likelihood, 22.6%, as an example. Just to illustrate this, I mean, I've even seen in some cards that some batters some pitchers have a rating of 10, and I think the real issue is there's not a lot of precision in this game with only 36 chances to work with. 1 out of 36 chances is 2.7%. And so if you just look in any one of these columns, the difference between a 10 pitcher and a 1 pitcher is, in most cases, 25 percentage points. And that's just huge. I mean, I think in a perfect world, the range would be tighter here around the middle. But whether it's the batter cards or the pitcher cards, the gradations, I guess I would say, would be a little bit more refined so that you could reflect pitchers a little more differently. So I know this is kind of geeky and all that, but I think if you were gonna use a Pennant Drive these days, you would probably need to create a whole new set of at least pitcher cards with kind of more mathematically accurate ratings. Now, in fairness, the creator was probably sitting in his kitchen table with a tablet, and if he was lucky, by 1980, he might have had a handheld calculator that did 4-function math, but he was probably just manually crunching a lot of numbers, and may have made an oversight here. Similarly, he would have had to have indirectly calculated the batters faced for the pitchers. It's easy to do, but because the data like you get on Baseball Reference wouldn't have been as readily available. Okay, so with that, I think maybe just in the interest of time, I'll just briefly summarize, and feel free to pause this video, but I'll briefly summarize what some of the advanced play features were in this game, and there are actually a lot, and I will give the creator a lot of credit here. So they're typical stolen bases, but they were early adopter of the idea of a jump factor. I think we talked about that. Hit and run, sacrifice, squeeze, pretty normal. They had something called a take sign, which was kind of odd, but basically the batting team could call take, and then there would be rolls of the dice, and they were just balls and strikes, and you would keep rolling until there was a walk or a strikeout, or until you took off the take sign. I'm not sure what it accomplished, but kind of an interesting thing. They also had bunting for a base hit. Some people like that. It's just an interesting feature they decided to put in. They had a lot involved here about defensive strategy, so you could hold the runner on first. You could make a deliberate pickoff play, course infield in or regular depth. But they also had guarding the lines, against the extra base hit, and they had the ability to bring the outfield in shallow to try to prevent a winning run from scoring or what have you in the late innings. We talked about pitcher fatigue. We talked about rare plays. The other thing they had on the batter cards, and I'm not sure I see it, maybe I do see it on Stargill's card here, but, and I'm going from memory here, but if there was an asterisk beside the extra base hit rating, I think this rating got bumped up one if there were men on base. So in a sense, it was a little bit of a kind of a clutch feature. We talked about pitchers affecting home runs, and then like many sims, they just had generic left-hand batter and right-hand batter adjustments. So random numbers. So what I did, because I'm a geek, I took these two charts, I put them through an optical character tool, recognition tool that I found online. It converted both of these tables to Excel. I massaged the data, and I did a summary to see how evenly the chances from 11 to 66 were distributed. And what I found out was that they weren't evenly distributed. And so it's not to say that they aren't random numbers in the literal sense, but they also are not evenly distributed, which probably could influence gameplay over time. I think 23 was the most common dice roll on those charts, and there were 52 or so of them out of 1,300 different dice rolls. And then I think the smallest one was 66, which only occurred 19 times. So you wouldn't want to use these random number charts for apba. Not a criticism, but I developed a theory which I tested. My theory is that what they did to create these random number charts is they sat at their kitchen table and they rolled 2 dice 1,300 times and wrote down the results and typed them up onto a chart. And I don't know that to be true, but one way I tested my theory was I used Excel to randomly roll 2 d6 dice 1,300 times, and then I picked out the maximum and the minimum. And of course, the specific dice roll that was maximum and minimum changed each time I did the simulation. But interestingly, the highest dice roll occurrence was typically occurred 52 or 50 times approximately, and the smallest, just like here, occurred around 19 or 20 times. I probably could have run some kind of standard deviation or something else, but I think this kind of supports my theory that their random number table just was a function of rolling dice. In fairness, the instructions clearly say if you have 2 multicolored, 2 different dice, roll your dice, which of course what any of us would do. So that's just a little side thing. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to wrap it up here. So I mentioned the Big League Manager game, so if you want to try to compare that engine to Pennant Drive, there is the wrong link here. I make one mistake every video, and this is the one. Actually, so what you need to do to find that Big League Manager video is to go to my YouTube channel, which is pretty obvious, at Steve_Etzel, or just do a Google search. These files, or what I've been showing you today in terms of charts, are going to be posted eventually on a Facebook page that I help moderate called the Astra Batter Up Baseball Game. And it's easy to find on Facebook. And probably it'll be late April before these types of scans will be put up there, but we're going to preserve them for posterity's sake. The only thing I would suggest is it's possible by then we may have changed the name of the group, because we've got multiple games now that we've got loaded up there for people's review. If you want to reach me on Delphi, my name is Tenacious E, and my email address is here at the bottom. One thing I was going to mention, and this is again in fairness to the developer, is as I said, they had at least three versions of this. By the time the last one came around in 1982, they had revisited this master result chart, and as best I can tell by looking at the cards, which look a little different than the first type, is that they re-engineered the pitcher-batter interaction as it relates to hits. So now these 31 to 34 rolls are numbered 1 to 16. So the batter has a batting rating of 1 to 16. Not too unlike the fact he had a letter rating before. But in terms of the pitcher, he has a different rating now. And this is the hit adjustment rating. And I need to get a picture up here, sorry. So here we have a picture. So here we have Jim Bibby, and his hit adjustment rating is now expressed in terms of a plus or a minus. So, I think the better pitchers would reduce the hitter's hit rating. So like here, Dale Barra has a hit rating of 9. If he was facing his teammate Jim Bibby, it's a -3. So Dale Barra's hit rating would actually be a 6 for purposes of checking this chart. So, or it could be a plus. And just from briefly, very briefly, looking at these pitcher charts in particular, and the batter charts, it looks like they might have done a slightly better adjustment at making reasonable pitching ratings, where the ratings, a lot of them are 0, 1, maybe 3 here, but I think it just reflects the fact that, as I said before, I think the range is a lot tighter than the total possible ratings. If I were to say one last thing, I know this is going on longer, so God help you if you've listened this far, is this engine, in addition to some of the weaknesses about the precision and so on, it would have a limitation in terms of being able to handle modern players, particularly as it relates to strikeouts, because there's only 11 possible strikeout chances on this chart, and 11 out of 36 is about 31%. And so to the extent that you have pitchers, or batters perhaps, but to the extent you have pitchers who, like Aroldis Chapman or Edwin Diaz in 2022, to the extent you had any of these pitchers who had high strikeout percentages, you're just not going to be able to reflect them here on the chart. Now, from a mathematical standpoint, it'll just result in some other kind of out, presumably, but especially if you build the card correctly. But that was just another minor thing that I noticed. This has gone on longer than I intended. Thanks if you've listened this far. As always, comments are welcome and encouraged. Like and subscribe if you wish. And thanks again for listening.